In the marble corridors of Avalon Palace, where whispers carried more weight than proclamations, and silence could shatter kingdoms, Crown Prince Alexander faced the moment that would define his reign before it even began. The woman he loved stood accused, his stepmother's rage echoed through gilded halls, and his father, King Edmund, sat in judgment with the weight of centuries pressing upon his shoulders. Sometimes, the most powerful weapon a future king possesses is not his voice, but his deliberate, earth-shaking silence. This is the story of how one man's choice to remain silent in the face of fury became the loudest declaration of love, loyalty, and leadership the kingdom had ever witnessed. The autumn rain pelted against the towering windows of Avalon Palace's east wing, creating rivulets that seemed to mirror the tears threatening to fall from Princess Catherine's eyes. She stood in the ornate library, her slender fingers tracing the leather spine of a book she wasn't really seeing, while the weight of accusations pressed down upon her shoulders like a lead cloak. "Your Highness," came the gentle voice of her lady-in-waiting, Margaret, who had served the royal family for over 2 decades. "Perhaps you should rest. This storm will pass." Catherine turned from the window, her auburn hair catching the dim light from the crystal chandelier above. "Will it, Margaret? Will it really pass?" Her voice carried the exhaustion of someone who had been fighting battles on multiple fronts for months. The scandal had erupted 3 weeks ago when tabloid photographs surfaced showing Catherine in what appeared to be an intimate conversation with James Morrison, a commoner who ran a charity foundation in the kingdom's capital. The images, taken from a distance and at misleading angles, suggested an inappropriate relationship between the future queen and the handsome philanthropist. What the photographs couldn't capture was the truth. Catherine had been discussing her secret project to fund education programs for underprivileged children throughout the kingdom. James Morrison wasn't her lover, but her advisor, helping her navigate the complex world of charitable giving without the palace's knowledge. She had wanted to surprise her husband-to-be, Crown Prince Alexander, with the announcement of her independent charitable foundation as a wedding gift. Now, 3 weeks before their wedding, the very man she sought to honor with her secret project stood at the center of a media firestorm that threatened to tear apart not just their upcoming marriage, but the stability of the monarchy itself. Queen Isabella, Alexander's stepmother and King Edmund's second wife, had made no secret of her disapproval of Catherine from the moment Alexander announced their engagement 2 years ago. Isabella had always believed that Alexander should marry someone of more significant royal blood, preferably Princess Sophia of neighboring Castellan, who would bring valuable political alliances and substantial dowry. The scandal had given Isabella the ammunition she had long sought. For 3 weeks, she had been orchestrating a campaign of whispered conversations with influential courtiers, carefully planted stories in sympathetic media outlets, and strategic meetings with key members of parliament who held sway over matters of royal succession. "The girl is unsuitable," Isabella had declared to Lady Pemberton, one of her closest allies, during their afternoon tea just yesterday. "These photographs prove what I've always suspected. She lacks the moral character necessary to be queen. Alexander deserves better. The kingdom deserves better." But Isabella underestimated the depth of Alexander's love for Catherine, and, more importantly, she underestimated his growing political acumen and understanding of power dynamics within the palace walls. Crown Prince Alexander stood 6 feet 2 inches tall, with the same penetrating blue eyes that had made his late mother, Queen Margaret, famous throughout Europe. Unlike his father, who had grown increasingly cautious and diplomatic with age, Alexander possessed a quiet intensity that commanded attention without demanding it. He had spent the last decade preparing for his future role, studying not just constitutional law and international relations, but also the subtle art of reading people and situations. He knew Catherine was innocent. Not because he was blinded by love, though his devotion to her was absolute, but because he knew her character. In their 2 years together, she had never given him reason to doubt her integrity. More than that, he had noticed the increased charitable activities on her calendar, the mysterious meetings with advisors, and the way her eyes lit up whenever she spoke vaguely about helping people in new ways. Alexander had conducted his own quiet investigation through his personal security team. Within days of the scandal breaking, he knew exactly what Catherine had been doing, who James Morrison really was, and how the photographs had been manipulated to suggest impropriety where none existed. The truth was beautiful and heartbreaking. Catherine had been working for 6 months to establish the Alexander Foundation for Educational Excellence, a charitable organization that would provide scholarships, build schools, and fund teacher training programs throughout the kingdom. She had been using her own inheritance from her grandmother to seed the foundation, and Morrison had been helping her establish the legal framework and identify the most effective programs to support. The photographs that had caused such scandal were taken during a meeting where Morrison was showing Catherine proposals for the foundation's first major project, a network of literacy centers in rural areas where Alexander had spent time during his military service and had often spoken about the educational challenges he witnessed. But Alexander made a strategic decision that surprised even his closest advisors. He would not immediately reveal Catherine's innocence or the truth behind the photographs. Instead, he would watch, listen, and allow his stepmother to reveal the extent of her opposition to his marriage and her willingness to damage the monarchy to get her way. For 3 weeks, Alexander maintained a carefully neutral public stance. He neither defended Catherine nor condemned her. He attended his scheduled royal duties, spoke when protocol demanded, but otherwise maintained a silence that grew more powerful with each passing day. The palace staff noticed the change immediately. Alexander, normally warm and conversational with longtime employees, became politely distant. He attended family dinners, but contributed little to conversation. He fulfilled his obligations to Isabella with perfect courtesy, but none of the familial warmth she had grown accustomed to over the years since marrying his father. King Edmund, now 72 and increasingly frail, watched his son's behavior with growing concern and admiration. Edmund had ruled for 35 years, navigating numerous scandals and political challenges, but he had never seen his son employ such sophisticated psychological tactics. "He's learning," Edmund confided to his private secretary, Sir William Hawthorne, during one of their evening briefings. "He's learning that sometimes silence speaks louder than any defense." Meanwhile, Catherine suffered in isolation. The palace had assigned her additional security, officially for her protection but unofficially to monitor her activities and limit her contact with the outside world. She was confined to the palace grounds, unable to continue her charitable work or meet with the advisors who could help her explain the truth of the situation. The British media had divided into 2 camps. The traditional royalist publications maintained careful neutrality, waiting for official statements from the palace. But the tabloids and newer digital media outlets fed voraciously on the scandal, publishing daily updates, expert analyses, and increasingly wild speculation about Catherine's relationship with Morrison. Public opinion polls showed the nation split almost evenly. Younger citizens, particularly women, tended to support Catherine, viewing the scandal as an invasion of privacy and an example of the impossible standards placed on royal women. Older, more traditional citizens expressed concern about the moral implications and whether Catherine could serve effectively as queen under such circumstances. International media picked up the story, and suddenly, the private drama of Avalon's royal family became global entertainment. European royalty privately expressed sympathy for Catherine while publicly maintaining diplomatic silence. American late-night talk shows made jokes about the scandal. Social media campaigns emerged supporting both sides of the controversy. Through it all, Alexander maintained his strategic silence, attending charity galas where he smiled politely but said nothing about the scandal. He fulfilled military obligations, reviewing troops, and attending ceremonies with perfect composure. He met with government ministers on routine matters, discussing policy and legislation as if the greatest personal crisis of his life wasn't playing out in international headlines. But those closest to Alexander began to notice subtle signs of the enormous pressure he was under. His personal valet, Thomas, who had served Alexander since his teenage years, observed that the prince was sleeping very little. Lights remained on in Alexander's private study until the early hours of the morning. His usual appetite diminished, and he often left meals barely touched. Alexander's younger sister, Princess Olivia, tried multiple times to discuss the situation with him, but he deflected her attempts at conversation with the same polite distance he showed everyone else. "Alex, you're scaring me," Olivia told him during a chance encounter in the palace garden. "You're behaving like a stranger. Catherine needs you. We all need to understand what you're thinking." Alexander looked at his sister with eyes that held depths of pain and calculation she had never seen before. "I'm thinking about the future, Liv. I'm thinking about what kind of king I want to be and what kind of Queen Catherine will be. Some battles require patience." As the first part of this royal drama drew to a close, Isabella prepared for what she believed would be her final assault on Catherine's reputation. She had scheduled a private meeting with King Edmund, armed with additional evidence her investigators had uncovered, and a clear ultimatum. Catherine must be removed from the line of succession, or Isabella would take her concerns public through Parliament and the media. She had no idea that Alexander had spent 3 weeks preparing for exactly this confrontation, or that his silence had been the most powerful weapon in his arsenal, allowing his stepmother to reveal her true intentions while he gathered the evidence and allies he would need for the battle ahead. The storm outside Avalon Palace was nothing compared to the tempest about to break within its ancient walls. The morning of Isabella's planned confrontation with King Edmund dawned gray and cold, with frost covering the palace gardens like a delicate shroud. Queen Isabella rose early, spending extra time with her appearance and reviewing the carefully prepared documents that would support her case against Catherine. She had waited 2 years for this opportunity, and she intended to make the most of it. Unknown to Isabella, Alexander had risen even earlier. At 5 in the morning, he was already in his father's private study, sharing tea and the truth about Catherine's charitable work. King Edmund listened in silence as his son revealed the complete story of the Alexander Foundation for Educational Excellence, the months of careful planning, and the twisted way innocent photographs had been manipulated into scandal. "And you've known this for 3 weeks?" Edmund asked, his weathered hands wrapped around his teacup. "From the second day," Alexander confirmed. "I wanted to see how far Isabella would push this. I needed to understand the extent of her opposition to my marriage and her willingness to damage the monarchy to get her way." Edmund studied his son with new appreciation. The young man sitting across from him bore little resemblance to the eager, sometimes impulsive prince he had been just months ago. The scandal had forged Alexander into someone harder, more calculating, but also more determined. "You've put Catherine through hell for the sake of strategy," Edmund observed. "I've put her through 3 weeks of difficulty to save her from a lifetime of being undermined and sabotaged," Alexander replied firmly. "If I had simply revealed the truth immediately, Isabella would have found another way to attack Catherine's fitness to be queen. This way, I've allowed her to show her true colors while I built an unassailable case." As if summoned by their conversation, a soft knock came at the study door. Sir William Hawthorne entered with a grave expression. "Your Majesty, Your Highness," he began formally. "Queen Isabella has requested an immediate private audience." She indicated the matter was of utmost urgency regarding the succession. Edmund and Alexander exchanged glances. The final act was beginning. An hour later, Isabella swept into the king's formal receiving room, her bearing regal and her purpose clear. She had chosen to wear her most impressive jewelry and the deep blue dress that Alexander's late mother had once complimented. The symbolism was intentional. She was presenting herself as the proper guardian of royal tradition. King Edmund sat behind his massive oak desk, while Alexander stood by the window, his back partially turned to the room. Isabella had specifically requested that Alexander be present, intending to force him to hear the case against his chosen bride. "Your Majesty," Isabella began, "I come to you today not as your wife, but as someone who loves this monarchy and fears for its future. The situation with Catherine has gone beyond scandal. It has become a threat to the crown itself." She opened her leather portfolio and began laying out documents and photographs on Edmund's desk. "These are the original photographs, Your Majesty. But my investigators have discovered more disturbing information about Miss Catherine's relationship with Mr. Morrison." Alexander turned from the window, his expression unreadable. Isabella interpreted his attention as validation of her approach. "Morrison is not simply a charity administrator," Isabella continued, her voice gaining confidence. "His organization has received significant funding from political groups that oppose the monarchy. He has written articles questioning the relevance of hereditary leadership in modern society. Catherine has been meeting secretly with someone who fundamentally opposes everything our family represents." This was new information to Alexander, but he maintained his neutral expression while mentally noting that his stepmother's investigators had been more thorough than he anticipated. "Furthermore," Isabella pressed on, "I have testimony from 3 separate palace staff members who observed Catherine's behavior over the past 6 months. Secret phone calls, meetings arranged without proper security protocols, and what they describe as suspicious nervousness whenever questioned about her activities." King Edmund listened without interruption, occasionally glancing at the documents Isabella presented. Alexander remained silent, though Isabella noticed tension in his shoulders that she interpreted as growing concern about Catherine's behavior. The monarchy cannot survive another major scandal, Isabella declared, building to her crescendo. We have weathered divorces, financial controversies, and political challenges, but we cannot withstand a queen whose moral character is fundamentally compromised. Catherine must be removed from the line of succession, and Alexander must be free to choose a bride who will strengthen rather than weaken the crown. The room fell into silence except for the ticking of the antique clock on Edmund's mantel. Isabella felt a surge of triumph. She had presented her case clearly and comprehensively. The evidence was substantial, and the political necessity was obvious. Is there more? Edmund asked quietly. I have prepared a statement for Parliament, and the media, Isabella replied, producing another document. With your permission, I will announce that the royal family has conducted a thorough investigation and concluded that Catherine is unsuitable for marriage to the crown prince. We can present it as a mutual decision, allowing both Catherine and Alexander to preserve some dignity. Alexander finally spoke, his voice carrying a strange quality that Isabella couldn't identify. And if I refuse to end the engagement? Isabella turned to face him directly. Then, you will be choosing personal desire over royal duty. You will be endangering the monarchy your mother died serving, and your father has spent his life protecting. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Isabella had invoked the memory of Alexander's beloved mother and questioned his commitment to royal duty. It was a calculated risk, but she believed it would force him to capitulate. Instead, Alexander smiled. It was not a pleasant smile or a happy one. It was the smile of someone who had been playing a much deeper game than anyone realized. Isabella, Alexander said, moving away from the window and approaching his father's desk, you've made several assumptions that I think we should address. He picked up one of the photographs Isabella had presented as evidence of Catherine's inappropriate relationship with Morrison. This photograph, taken outside Morrison's office building, shows Catherine leaving what you characterize as a secret meeting. Alexander opened his own folder and placed a document beside the photograph. This is the building directory. Morrison's charity organization shares the building with the law firm of Pemberton, Hastings, and Vale, the firm that has been helping Catherine establish a charitable foundation in my name as a surprise wedding gift. Isabella's confident expression faltered slightly, but she maintained her composure. That proves nothing. She could have met with the lawyers as cover for meeting with Morrison. Alexander nodded agreeably. You're right. It proves nothing by itself. He placed another document on the desk. This is a bank statement showing Catherine has transferred nearly £200,000 of her own inheritance to fund the Alexander Foundation for Educational Excellence. The foundation that Morrison has been helping her establish to surprise me with programs supporting education in rural areas where I served during my military deployment. The blood began to drain from Isabella's face, but Alexander continued with devastating calm. This is a letter from James Morrison to the Department of Education, written 6 months ago, requesting guidance on establishing educational programs in partnership with royal patronage. This is Morrison's academic record from Oxford, where he earned a doctorate in educational policy. And this, Alexander placed a final document on the desk, is a letter from Catherine to me, dated 4 months ago, but never sent, explaining her desire to surprise me with a charitable foundation that would continue my mother's commitment to educational causes. The silence in the room was deafening. Isabella stared at the documents as if they might disappear if she looked hard enough. King Edmund leaned back in his chair, watching his son orchestrate what was clearly a carefully planned revelation. But your investigators discovered Morrison's political connections, Isabella said weakly, grasping for the one piece of evidence that still seemed damaging. They did excellent work, Alexander acknowledged. Morrison did write articles questioning hereditary leadership. He also wrote articles supporting constitutional monarchy, arguing that royal institutions can evolve to serve modern democratic societies more effectively. He's a thoughtful academic who believes the monarchy should justify its existence through service rather than tradition alone. Alexander's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath the surface. I happen to agree with him. I believe the monarchy survives not because of our bloodline, but because of our usefulness to the people we serve. Catherine understands this. Her secret foundation was an attempt to demonstrate that usefulness through action rather than ceremony. Isabella felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. Everything she had built her case on was crumbling, but she made one final attempt to salvage the situation. Even if her intentions were innocent, the scandal has damaged the monarchy. The public perception will change dramatically when we announce the truth, Alexander interrupted. When the people learn that their future queen spent her own money and months of her time secretly planning charitable works to honor her future husband and serve the kingdom, they will see exactly the kind of character they want in their royal family. Edmund finally spoke, his voice carrying the authority of 3 decades on the throne. Isabella, you have presented a case based on incomplete information and biased interpretation. More concerning, you have attempted to manipulate me into destroying my son's happiness and removing someone who appears to be exactly the kind of person we need in the royal family. Isabella realized the trap she had walked into. In her eagerness to destroy Catherine, she had revealed her own willingness to damage the monarchy and manipulate the king. She had shown that her opposition to Catherine was based not on legitimate concerns about the crown's welfare, but on personal preferences and political calculations. Your Majesty, she began, but Edmund raised his hand for silence. Alexander, the king said, I believe you owe Catherine an apology for allowing this to continue for 3 weeks. And I believe you owe the kingdom an explanation. Alexander nodded gravely. Both will be provided today. I've scheduled a press conference for this afternoon where Catherine and I will announce the Alexander Foundation and reveal the truth behind the recent photographs and speculation. But even as Alexander savored his strategic victory, he knew the hardest part was still ahead. He had defeated Isabella's attempt to destroy his marriage, but he still had to repair the damage done to Catherine's trust and the pain he had caused her through 3 weeks of silence. And Isabella, cornered and humiliated, was not the type of woman to accept defeat gracefully. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. Within an hour of the devastating confrontation in King Edmund's study, word began to spread through the palace's intricate network of servants, guards, and courtiers that something significant had transpired. Isabella's rapid departure from the king's quarters, her ashen complexion, and the urgent series of phone calls that followed did not go unnoticed by the carefully trained staff who made the palace function. Alexander knew he had perhaps 6 hours before Isabella regrouped and launched whatever counterattack she was planning. His first priority was Catherine, who had spent 3 weeks in virtual isolation, believing that the man she loved was either too weak to defend her or had begun to doubt her innocence himself. He found Catherine in the palace's conservatory, a glass-enclosed garden that had been his mother's favorite retreat. She was sitting on a stone bench beneath a towering fig tree, reading the same book she had been holding for the past hour without turning a page. Her lady-in-waiting, Margaret, sat discreetly nearby, working on embroidery while keeping a protective watch over her charge. Catherine, Alexander said softly as he approached. She looked up with eyes that held a complex mixture of hope, wariness, and deep hurt. Margaret immediately rose and withdrew to a respectful distance, understanding that this conversation would determine not just the future of Catherine and Alexander's relationship, but potentially the stability of the monarchy itself. Alex, Catherine replied, her voice carefully neutral. Have you come to tell me the wedding is canceled? Because I think I deserve to hear it from you rather than reading about it in tomorrow's newspapers. Alexander sat beside her on the bench, close enough to touch, but respecting the emotional distance she had created. I've come to ask your forgiveness and to tell you that I know about the Alexander Foundation. Catherine's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly. You know? I've known since the second day of this nightmare, Alexander said quietly. I know about your grandmother's inheritance, about the months you spent planning to surprise me, about Morrison's academic background and his role as your advisor. I know about the literacy centers you wanted to build in rural areas and the scholarship programs you designed. I know that you spent 6 months creating something beautiful to honor both my mother's memory and my own experiences in service. Tears began to flow down Catherine's cheeks, but her voice carried anger rather than relief. You've known for 3 weeks and said nothing? You let me suffer through accusations and public humiliation when you could have ended this with a single statement. Alexander nodded, accepting the full weight of her fury. Yes, I made a strategic decision that cost you dearly, and I will spend the rest of my life making it up to you if you'll let me. Strategic decision? Catherine's voice rose. I was imprisoned here, Alex. I couldn't see my friends, couldn't continue my work, couldn't even speak to the advisors who could have helped explain the truth. I was treated like a criminal while you played political games. Alexander turned to face her fully. I was preparing for war, Catherine. A war for our future and for the kind of monarchy we'll inherit. Isabella has been trying to destroy our relationship since the day I proposed. If I had simply revealed the truth immediately, she would have found another way to attack you. This way, I allowed her to show her true colors while building an unassailable defense of your character. Catherine stared at him as if seeing a stranger. Who are you? The man I fell in love with would never have been so calculating with someone he claimed to love. The words hit Alexander like physical blows, but he pressed on. The man you fell in love with was still learning how to be a king. These 3 weeks have taught me that sometimes protecting the people we love requires making choices that cause temporary pain to prevent permanent damage. Temporary pain? Catherine stood abruptly, pacing away from the bench. I've spent 3 weeks believing you might doubt my faithfulness. I've endured public humiliation while wondering if the man I'm supposed to marry in 10 days thinks I'm capable of betraying him. Alexander rose and followed her, his voice urgent. I never doubted you. Not for a single moment. I know your character, Catherine. I know your heart. Everything I did was to protect you from future attacks. Catherine whirled to face him, her eyes blazing. You protected me by abandoning me? You protected me by allowing your stepmother to orchestrate a campaign against me while you stood silent. I protected you by allowing her to reveal herself completely, Alexander replied. Isabella has shown that she's willing to damage the monarchy itself to prevent our marriage. She's demonstrated that her opposition to you isn't based on legitimate concerns, but on personal prejudice and political calculation. Now everyone will see what she really is. Catherine shook her head, her anger giving way to a deeper sadness. And what am I supposed to be, Alex? A pawn in your political strategies? A tool for you to use in your battles with your family? Alexander felt the ground shifting beneath him. He had been so focused on defeating Isabella's machinations that he had underestimated the damage his silence would do to Catherine's trust. You're the woman I love. You're my partner, my equal, my future queen. Everything I did was to ensure that no one could ever question your fitness for that role. But you questioned my ability to handle the truth, Catherine replied. You decided I was too weak or too naive to be included in your plans. You treated me like someone who needed protection rather than someone who deserved honesty. Margaret, who had been watching from across the conservatory, approached carefully. Your Highness, she addressed Alexander. Perhaps we should discuss the press conference. The media arrangements need to be finalized. Alexander looked at Catherine, searching her face for some sign of forgiveness or understanding. Will you stand with me this afternoon? Will you help me tell the truth about the foundation and put an end to this scandal? Catherine was quiet for a long moment, weighing her options and her feelings. Finally, she spoke. I'll stand with you because the truth needs to be told, and because the monarchy is bigger than our personal issues. But, Alex, we need to have a much longer conversation about trust and partnership after this press conference. If we're going to be married, if I'm going to be queen, I need to know that you see me as an equal partner, not as someone to be managed and protected. Alexander nodded, relief flooding through him despite the clear conditions Catherine had set. Whatever conversation we need to have, whenever you're ready to have it, I'll be there. And I'll be honest about everything from now on. Meanwhile, across the palace in her own suite of rooms, Isabella was far from accepting defeat. She had spent the hour after her humiliating confrontation with Edmund and Alexander making urgent phone calls to her most trusted allies and advisors. Lady Pemberton arrived within 30 minutes of Isabella's summons, finding the queen pacing her sitting room like a caged animal. It was a trap, Isabella told her oldest confidant. Alexander has known the truth for weeks and allowed me to build a case against Catherine just so he could destroy it publicly. He made me look like a fool in front of the king. Lady Pemberton, a shrewd woman who had navigated palace politics for 40 years, immediately understood the implications. What did you reveal to them? Everything, Isabella admitted. My investigation, my evidence, my intentions to take the matter to Parliament if necessary. I showed them exactly how far I was willing to go to prevent this marriage. Lady Pemberton sat heavily in one of Isabella's silk-upholstered chairs. Then, you've lost more than just this battle. You've shown them that you're willing to damage the monarchy for personal reasons. That's not a position you can recover from easily. Isabella stopped pacing and faced her friend. There has to be another way. Alexander may have defeated my case against Catherine, but the fundamental problem remains. She's not the right choice for queen. She doesn't have the political connections, the social background, or the experience necessary for the role. But she does have something more valuable, Lady Pemberton replied grimly. She has Alexander's love and, after today's revelation, she'll have the public's sympathy and admiration. The story of a future queen secretly establishing charitable works as a surprise for her husband-to-be is exactly the kind of romantic gesture that will capture people's imagination. Isabella felt her frustration growing. There has to be something we can do. Some way to prevent this marriage, or at least limit Catherine's influence once she becomes queen. Lady Pemberton considered carefully before responding. Isabella, you need to think about your own position. After today, your relationship with Alexander and Catherine will be irreparably damaged. King Edmund will likely limit your role in palace affairs. Your best strategy now is to minimize the damage to yourself and try to rebuild some semblance of a working relationship with the future king and queen. But Isabella was not ready to accept defeat or compromise. As Lady Pemberton departed, Isabella made one more phone call, this time to a contact she had hoped never to use, a journalist named Derek Hawthorne who specialized in palace intrigue and had been pursuing stories about the royal family for over a decade. Derek, Isabella said when the call connected, I have a story for you. But it needs to be handled very carefully, and you'll need to protect your source completely. As Isabella began to spin a new narrative, one that would portray Alexander as manipulative and calculating, willing to sacrifice his future wife's emotional well-being for political advantage, she didn't realize that palace security routinely monitored communications from senior royal family members. By the time Isabella finished her conversation with Hawthorne, transcripts of the call were already being prepared for Alexander's review. His stepmother's refusal to accept defeat gracefully was about to provide him with even more ammunition for the battles ahead. The press conference was scheduled for 4 o'clock that afternoon, but Alexander was beginning to realize that revealing the truth about Catherine's foundation would be only the first move in what promised to be a much longer and more complex political chess match. Isabella's wounded pride and desperate ambition had transformed her from a strategic opponent into a dangerous wild card, capable of actions that could damage not just Alexander and Catherine's relationship, but the monarchy itself. The grand ballroom of Avalon Palace had been transformed into a press conference venue, with gleaming mahogany podiums positioned beneath crystal chandeliers that had witnessed 2 centuries of royal announcements. Representatives from major international media outlets filled the carefully arranged chairs, their cameras, and recording equipment focused on the dual podiums where Crown Prince Alexander and Catherine would soon reveal the truth that had been hidden beneath weeks of scandal. Alexander stood in the adjacent preparation room, adjusting his navy blue suit, while reviewing the carefully crafted statement that would clear Catherine's name and expose Isabella's manipulation. But his mind wasn't entirely focused on the press conference. He was acutely aware that Catherine, who was having her makeup touched up by palace staff in the adjoining room, had barely spoken to him since their confrontation in the conservatory. Sir William Hawthorne approached with a folder containing the most recent development in what had become an increasingly complex situation. Your Highness, he said discreetly, palace security has intercepted a communication from Queen Isabella to Derek Hawthorne of the Royal Tribune. She's attempting to plan a story portraying you as manipulative and calculating. Alexander reviewed the transcript quickly, his jaw tightening as he read Isabella's attempt to reframe his strategic silence as emotional cruelty toward Catherine. She's not just attacking Catherine anymore, he observed. She's going after my fitness to be king. Indeed, Sir William confirmed. She's suggesting that a man who would put his future wife through public humiliation for political purposes lacks the moral character necessary for the crown. Alexander felt a chill of recognition. Isabella's new attack was particularly dangerous because it contained elements of truth that would resonate with critics of the monarchy. His 3-week silence, while strategically effective, could indeed be portrayed as cold and calculating behavior unworthy of a future king. What's Hawthorne's timeline for publication? Alexander asked. The story is scheduled to appear in tomorrow morning's edition, just hours after your press conference, Sir William replied. The timing is clearly intended to undermine the positive coverage you're hoping to generate today. Alexander realized that Isabella had learned from her earlier defeat. Instead of attacking Catherine's character, she was now attacking his, using his own tactical success against him. It was a sophisticated political maneuver that demonstrated his stepmother was far from finished with their conflict. Catherine emerged from the makeup room, looking radiant in an emerald green dress that complemented her auburn hair and projected the confidence of a future queen. But Alexander could see the tension in her shoulders and the careful distance she maintained between them as they prepared to face the media together. Are you ready? Alexander asked. Catherine nodded formally. I'm ready to tell the truth about the foundation and clear my name. After that, we'll see what happens. Her words carried a subtext that Alexander understood completely. Catherine would fulfill her public duty by standing beside him during the press conference. But their personal relationship remained unresolved. The damage done by his 3 weeks of silence had created wounds that wouldn't heal simply because he had proven his strategic brilliance. As they entered the ballroom together, Alexander was struck by the surreal nature of the moment. Here he was, preparing to achieve a complete public vindication of the woman he loved, while simultaneously facing the possibility that his tactical success had cost him her trust and affection. The assembled media representatives rose respectfully as the future king and queen approached the podiums. Alexander could see the anticipation in their faces. After 3 weeks of speculation and scandal, they were finally going to hear directly from the principals involved. Ladies and gentlemen, Alexander began, his voice carrying easily through the ballroom's excellent acoustics. I have called this press conference to address the recent speculation surrounding Miss Catherine's activities and to share some important information about her character and dedication to public service. He gestured to Catherine, who stepped forward with the poise that had made her a beloved figure even before the recent scandal. 3 weeks ago, photographs appeared in various publications suggesting an inappropriate relationship between my fiancé and Mr. James Morrison, a charitable organization administrator. Today, I want to tell you what those photographs actually documented. Alexander opened the leather folder he had placed on his podium and removed the first document. 6 months ago, Catherine began working with Mr. Morrison to establish the Alexander Foundation for Educational Excellence, a charitable organization funded entirely by her personal inheritance and designed as a surprise wedding gift to honor my military service and my late mother's commitment to educational causes. A murmur went through the assembled press corps. This was clearly not the story they had been expecting. Catherine stepped to her own podium, her voice clear and strong. The photographs that caused such controversy show me leaving meetings where I was working with educational policy experts, legal advisors, and charity administrators to create programs that would provide scholarships, build schools, and train teachers in rural areas throughout our kingdom. She opened her own folder and displayed bank statements and legal documents. I transferred nearly £200,000 of my own money to fund this foundation. Every meeting, every conversation, every document was related to creating something meaningful that would serve our people and honor the man I love. Alexander watched the journalists scribbling notes and whispering to colleagues. The story was clearly shifting in Catherine's favor, but he knew Isabella's counterattack was still coming. Mr. Morrison, Catherine continued, was chosen as an advisor not because of any personal relationship, but because of his doctorate in educational policy from Oxford and his 15 years of experience in establishing effective charitable programs. The allegations of impropriety are not just false. They are deeply hurtful to someone who has devoted months of work to serving the kingdom. One of the senior royal correspondents raised her hand. Your Highness, she addressed Alexander. Why did you wait 3 weeks to reveal this information? Why allow Miss Catherine to endure public scrutiny when you could have ended the speculation immediately? Alexander had prepared for this question, but he knew his answer would be scrutinized and potentially used against him. I made a difficult decision to investigate the source and motivation behind these allegations before responding. I wanted to ensure that we had complete information about how private charitable work had been twisted into scandal. Another journalist followed up immediately. Are you saying someone deliberately misrepresented these photographs? Alexander exchanged a glance with Catherine before responding. I'm saying that complex charitable work was reduced to sensational headlines without proper investigation or context. The people responsible for that misrepresentation will have to answer for their actions. Catherine added, what hurts most is that work done from love and service was portrayed as betrayal and scandal. But I understand that public figures must accept scrutiny, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to set the record straight. For the next 30 minutes, Alexander and Catherine fielded questions about the foundation, Catherine's charitable background, and their upcoming wedding. The tone of the press conference grew increasingly positive as journalists recognized the human interest appeal of a future queen secretly establishing charitable works as a wedding surprise. But Alexander knew that Isabella's planted story would hit the media within hours, potentially undoing all the goodwill they were generating. He made a calculated decision to address the coming attack preemptively. I want to address one more issue, Alexander said as the press conference was winding down. I know there will be criticism of my decision to investigate before responding to these allegations. Some will suggest that I should have immediately defended Catherine without gathering complete information. He paused, looking directly into the television cameras. I believe that effective leadership sometimes requires patience and careful analysis rather than immediate emotional reactions. I wanted to ensure that when I spoke about Catherine's character and work, I could do so with complete authority and unassailable evidence. Catherine looked at him with surprise. She hadn't expected him to address the potential criticism of his tactics so directly. Catherine deserves better than a hasty defense that might have been dismissed or undermined by incomplete information, Alexander continued. She deserves the complete vindication that comes from revealing the full truth about her dedication to service and her integrity. As the press conference concluded and they left the ballroom together, Catherine finally spoke to Alexander personally for the first time that day. That was well handled, she said quietly. You managed to defend your strategy without making it sound like I was expendable. You were never expendable, Alexander replied. You were always the most important thing I was fighting to protect. Catherine stopped walking and turned to face him in the palace corridor. Alex, we need to talk. Really talk. Not about press conferences or political strategies, but about us. About whether we can build a marriage based on partnership and trust after what's happened. Alexander nodded, knowing that his greatest challenge wasn't defeating Isabella's machinations or managing media coverage. His greatest challenge was rebuilding the relationship with the woman he loved, who had every right to question whether she could trust him with her heart and her future. As palace staff hurried around them, preparing for the media analysis and public response to the press conference, Alexander and Catherine stood in the corridor facing the reality that their relationship would require as much careful rebuilding as the public perception they had just begun to repair. The press conference had been a tactical success, but the war for their future together was just beginning. The morning after the press conference dawned crisp and clear, with early sunlight streaming through the ancient windows of Avalon Palace and illuminating what would prove to be the most consequential day in the recent history of the royal family. The initial media response to Catherine's vindication had been overwhelmingly positive, with headlines celebrating the Princess of Service and her secret foundation of love. But, as Alexander had predicted, Isabella's counterattack launched precisely on schedule. Derek Hawthorne's story appeared in the morning edition of the Royal Tribune under the headline, "The Calculating Prince: How Alexander Sacrificed Love for Politics." The article painted a damning portrait of a future king who was willing to manipulate his own fiancée's emotions for strategic advantage, questioning whether such calculated behavior indicated fitness for the crown. Alexander read the article in his private study while Catherine slept in her own quarters. They had talked until nearly 3 a.m, beginning the difficult process of rebuilding trust and understanding. Catherine had been clear that while she appreciated his strategic thinking, she needed assurance that their marriage would be a partnership of equals, not a relationship where she was protected through isolation and manipulation. The article was more damaging than Alexander had anticipated. Hawthorne had crafted the piece skillfully, using Alexander's own words from the press conference to suggest that his patience and careful analysis represented emotional coldness and political calculation inappropriate for a constitutional monarch. Sir William knocked and entered with the morning's media analysis. The story has been picked up by several international outlets, he reported grimly. The narrative is beginning to shift from Catherine's vindication to questions about your leadership style and emotional temperament. Alexander set down the newspaper and walked to the window overlooking the palace gardens where he and Catherine had often walked during happier times. Isabella has learned to play a more sophisticated game, he observed. She's not attacking Catherine anymore, because that battle is lost. She's attacking me using my own tactics against me. There's more, Sir William continued. Lady Pemberton has been making calls to senior members of Parliament, suggesting that the royal family needs guidance on proper behavior and decision-making. She's not directly calling for intervention, but she's laying groundwork for political pressure on the crown. Alexander turned from the window, his expression hardening. She's threatening constitutional crisis. If Parliament begins to question my fitness to inherit the crown, it could destabilize the entire monarchy. Before Sir William could respond, another knock came at the door. King Edmund entered, looking older than his 72 years but carrying himself with the authority that had sustained him through 35 years of rule. "Father," Alexander said, rising respectfully. Alexander, Edmund replied, settling into one of the study's leather chairs. We need to discuss the current situation and its implications for the succession. Sir William tactfully withdrew, leaving father and son alone for what would prove to be one of the most important conversations of Alexander's life. I've read Hawthorne's article, Edmund began. I've also received calls from 3 members of Parliament expressing concern about the royal family's stability. Isabella's campaign is more effective than we anticipated. Alexander sat across from his father, recognizing that this conversation would determine not just his future with Catherine, but his future as king. The article distorts my motivations, but I understand why it's effective. My silence can be interpreted as manipulation, even though it was strategic protection. Edmund studied his son carefully. The question isn't whether your strategy was effective. It clearly was. The question is whether a king can govern effectively using tactics that appear to sacrifice personal relationships for political advantage. And what's your assessment? Alexander asked. Edmund was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. Your mother once told me that the greatest challenge of being a royal is learning when to be human and when to be strategic. You've demonstrated that you can think and act strategically under pressure. But you've also shown that you're willing to cause pain to someone you love for the sake of long-term success. Alexander felt the weight of his father's words. I was trying to protect Catherine and our future. Everything I did was motivated by love. I believe that, Edmund replied. But Catherine doesn't fully believe it yet, and neither does the public. The monarchy survives not just on effective strategy, but on the perception that we care about our people's welfare and happiness. Before Alexander could respond, Margaret appeared at the door with an urgent message. Your Majesty, Your Highness, Miss Catherine requests an immediate meeting with both of you. She says it's regarding the future of her engagement to Prince Alexander. Edmund and Alexander exchanged glances, both recognizing that Catherine was about to make the decision that would determine whether Alexander's strategic victory had come at the cost of his personal happiness. They found Catherine in the same conservatory where Alexander had revealed his knowledge of the foundation the previous day. She was dressed simply but elegantly, her hair pulled back in a style that emphasized her serious expression. She had clearly spent the sleepless hours since their late-night conversation reaching a difficult decision. Your Majesty, Catherine addressed the king formally. I've asked to speak with both of you because the decision I need to make affects not just Alexander and myself, but the stability of the monarchy. She turned to include Alexander in her gaze. I've spent the night thinking about our conversation, about the events of the past 3 weeks, and about the kind of queen I want to be and the kind of marriage I want to have. Alexander felt his heart racing, uncertain whether Catherine was about to end their engagement or establish the terms for continuing it. I love Alexander, Catherine continued, and I believe he loves me. But love alone isn't sufficient for a royal marriage. We need partnership, trust, and shared values about how we'll serve the kingdom together. Edmund listened carefully, recognizing that Catherine was about to demonstrate the kind of political sophistication that would make her an effective queen. Alexander's strategy was successful in defeating Isabella's attack on my character, Catherine said. But it revealed something about his approach to leadership that concerns me. He made decisions about my life and our relationship without including me in the process. He protected me by isolating me rather than trusting me to be his partner in addressing the crisis. Alexander started to speak, but Catherine raised her hand for silence. However, she continued, I also understand that Alexander was learning how to balance being a prince, a future king, and a man in love. The past 3 weeks have taught both of us important lessons about communication, trust, and partnership. She moved to stand directly in front of Alexander. I'm willing to continue our engagement and proceed with the wedding, but with conditions that must be accepted publicly and privately. Edmund leaned forward, recognizing that Catherine was about to propose terms that could resolve the current crisis while establishing a framework for their future reign. First, Catherine said, our marriage must be a genuine partnership. I will not be managed or protected through isolation. I will be included in decisions that affect our relationship and our public service. Alexander nodded immediately. Agreed. Completely. Second, Catherine continued, we will establish the Alexander Foundation together as equal partners, and we will use it to demonstrate a new model of royal service based on collaboration rather than hierarchy. Agreed, Alexander said again, beginning to hope that Catherine was offering him a path forward rather than an ultimatum. Third, Catherine said, her voice growing stronger. We will address Isabella's continued opposition directly and publicly. We will not allow her to undermine our marriage or the monarchy through manipulation and political maneuvering. This condition surprised both Alexander and Edmund. Catherine was proposing to confront Isabella directly rather than trying to manage or appease her. "What do you have in mind?" Edmund asked. Catherine smiled for the first time in weeks. "I propose we use Isabella's own tactics against her. We announce that due to her attempts to manipulate the royal succession through false allegations and political pressure, she will have no formal role in our future reign. We make it clear that those who attack the monarchy from within will face consequences." Alexander stared at Catherine with growing admiration. She wasn't just forgiving his strategic miscalculations. She was proposing an even bolder strategy for dealing with Isabella's ongoing threat. "That would be a direct challenge to Isabella's position in the royal family," Edmund observed. "It could create significant family conflict." "The conflict already exists," Catherine replied. "Isabella has made it clear that she will continue attacking our marriage and trying to undermine our fitness to serve. We can either manage that threat defensively, or we can address it decisively." Alexander felt a surge of pride and love for the woman standing before him. Catherine wasn't just accepting his apology for the past 3 weeks. She was proposing to become his true partner in the political battles ahead. "There's one more condition," Catherine added. "Alexander must publicly acknowledge that his handling of the recent crisis, while strategically effective, caused unnecessary pain and demonstrated poor communication. He must commit to partnership rather than protection as the foundation of our relationship." Alexander didn't hesitate. "I can make that statement today. You deserved better from me, and I'll spend our marriage proving that I understand the difference between strategic thinking and emotional partnership." Edmund looked at his son and future daughter-in-law with something approaching awe. The crisis that had threatened to destroy their relationship and destabilize the monarchy had instead forged them into a formidable partnership capable of sophisticated political action. "Very well," Edmund said. "Let's call another press conference for this afternoon. We'll announce the terms of your renewed engagement, the establishment of your joint foundation, and Isabella's changed role in royal affairs." As Catherine and Alexander left the conservatory together, walking side by side rather than with the careful distance that had characterized their interactions for weeks, neither of them noticed Isabella watching from an upper-floor window. The Queen had underestimated Catherine's political acumen and strategic thinking. Her attempts to destroy the engagement had instead created a partnership that would be far more dangerous to her ambitions than Alexander's individual opposition had ever been. The battle for the future of the monarchy had reached its climax, but the war between traditional royal hierarchy and modern partnership had only just begun. And in that war, Catherine and Alexander would fight as equals, with a shared commitment to service that would transform not just their relationship, but the crown itself. Isabella's screams of fury echoed through the palace corridors that afternoon, but they could not break the silence of two people who had learned that love, combined with strategic thinking and genuine partnership, was the most powerful force in the arsenal of any king and queen.